just take a minute or two to enable everyone to come on who is joining us here today. Welcome, everyone, to our Secretary's Speaker Series, and thank you very much for joining. I'm Wade Crowfoot, and I have the privilege of leading our California Natural Resources Agency and moderating our discussion today. If this is your first time to one of these public dialogues, welcome. And if you are a return participant, welcome back. We're obviously talking about an important and timely topic here today, the impact of federal government decisions on California and what we're doing about it. We have a couple of different tools we use to keep this conversation interactive. One of them is the chat function. My colleague Geeta Chandra, who deserves credit for helping organize these discussions, maintains or staffs the chat function throughout our discussion. So as I bring on panelists, the chat will have information about our panelists and then the topics that we're discussing. Geeta often finds really good internet links to share that sort of deepen understanding. We also use a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. So at any point over the hour, if you have a question or an observation, click on the Q&A button and send that question to us. We'll see it. In some cases, we'll be able to respond via the keyboard and get that back to you. And both the question and answer are seen by everybody. And in some cases, you'll raise a good question to bring up with the participants here today. We are recording the discussion. So probably later today or by tomorrow, certainly, on our agency website, you'll be able to find a recording of the conversation, as well as a copy of all of the information provided in the chat, as well as the PowerPoint slides that we're going to be using today. So let's jump in. This has obviously been a really consequential last several months and 2025, and not a day or a week passes when we're not learning about a new federal decision and how it impacts California. Now, within state government, we're working to understand these impacts in real time, as well as understand with these impacts, how do we protect Californians, our values, our priorities in the process. So today we're bringing together a panel of leaders from within the Newsom Administration to talk about impacts in 5 specific areas, to the best of our knowledge, because we're still learning about these impacts in real time, and understanding how they're impacting California, and importantly, what we're doing about it. So today we'll cover wildfire safety, water supplies, outdoor recreation and conservation, coasts and oceans, and clean energy and transportation. And a few important points before we delve in. There are obviously numerous ways in which Americans are being impacted by these decisions in Washington, D.C. Medicaid is just one example with the recent budget reconciliation. Today, we're really addressing the impacts that touch our Natural Resources Agency. Important note that we want federal agencies to succeed, and in fact, we need them to succeed. 48% of California's land is owned and managed by the federal government, and on critical priorities like wildfire safety and water supplies, federal agency effectiveness is critical. So as we share the impacts to federal agencies, know we are supporting the men and women on the ground here in California who are within these agencies to succeed at their mission. Because if they fail, it impacts the prosperity and safety of Californians. It's also really important to point out that we are very open-minded to the federal government finding efficiencies within federal agencies. So when we talk about the cuts and the changes, we are avoiding taking a knee-jerk opposition for political reasons. And where the federal government is succeeding, we are very clear in pointing it out. I was with Governor Newsom in Los Angeles on Monday, where he detailed our progress since the LA wildfire 6 months ago. And he praised the Army Corps of Engineers, for example, a federal agency, for a really historic pace of debris removal on homes that have been destroyed by the fire. So really important to point that out. Um, so today we're going to cover decisions and cuts and attacks that have already happened and those that are being discussed and those that are being proposed. So to help us understand where things stand, I want to bring on my colleague, Sarah Amanzada, to the screen. Sarah, welcome. You and I work together really closely because you lead our agency's efforts with the federal government on these topics. So break down for us how you categorize decisions that have already been made and those that are being discussed and those that are being proposed.
Yeah. Thanks, Wade. Happy to be here. Exciting time to work in federal affairs. First, I just want to say that if you're having trouble sorting through articles and what's online with what's actually happening, you're not alone. I would say that there's an intentional effort to make it a bit confusing. So, for example, we've all read about and heard about the DOGE cuts to different agencies. National parks is a very visible example. But one thing to note is that it's not always easy to track because in some cases, the agencies still have budgets, but there may be hiring freezes and a number of open vacancies or suggested early retirement packages. So it does take some work to cross-reference budget documents with what we're seeing on the ground, and that's some of what we're going to get into today. Some of you may have seen that there was a new Supreme Court ruling this week on Trump's massive scale of proposed reductions in forces. And the Supreme Court lifted the lower court order that had been blocking the Trump administration from proceeding with some of the more large-scale layoffs at the Departments of Interior, Agriculture, and other federal agencies. In the lower court, here in the Northern District of California, plaintiffs had successfully argued that Trump's massive scale of reductions in force violated separation of powers. And that was lifted in an 8-1 decision in the Supreme Court earlier this week, actually since we announced this webinar. So we're now bracing for these really significant reductions in forces to be announced very soon, possibly even tomorrow and early next week. There's also been a lot of coverage of the recent so-called Big Beautiful Bill, the Budget Reconciliation Bill, which is an extraordinary tool that the president can use when one party is in power in all three houses to really take some big swings because they can pass the bill without any votes from the opposite party. I want to note that this reconciliation process is limited to revenue and spending, which does include Bill and IRA. So that's why we saw some changes to the solar and wind energy credits. And this was the vehicle for the now notorious attempted public land sales, which was withdrawn by Senator Mike Lee in the late hours of discussions when it became clear he didn't have votes from his own party. But by and large, next year's budget and appropriations are still under discussion in Congress and are being heard in committee hearings and marked up as we speak. So you'll see that Interior Secretary Burgum is testifying before various committees on a number of the issues we'll discuss today. We just received the markup, for example, on the Commerce and Oceans budget, which is of interest to many of us as it relates to NOAA allocations. And today, the Senate Environment and Natural Resources Committee is discussing the U.S. Forest Service budget. But over the next month is when Congress and Senate will be marking up these bills and making a decision. So this is the critical time to make your voices heard. And we're hoping that you can learn more about what's being contemplated, what California is doing, and really step up to make your voices heard. Back
Sarah,
to you, Wade.
really helpful. And thanks for all the work that you do, breaking down a really complicated federal process in Washington, D.C. in ways that I understand. And it's our goal over the next hour to break this down in ways that are several hundred people joining us here today. Gosh, almost 1,000 people can understand as well. So really three categories: cuts that have been made, including a lot of staffing cuts, these budget reconciliation changes through that bill that was just passed, and then President Trump's proposed budget, which calls for significant new cuts and changes. So we're going to break that down. Huge thanks, Sarah. So let's jump into it, and let's start with wildfire safety, critical priority for us all in California. And I want to bring on Patrick Wright. Patrick Wright serves as executive director of the governor's Wildfire Task Force, which is really meant to bring together all public agencies that impact wildfire resilience in California. I chair that task force with my equivalent from the U.S. Forest Service, the federal agency, and we have as leaders on the task force local government and tribal government, and other state agencies. So, Patrick, you're well positioned to understand just what's happening in DC and how it's impacting us in California. And why don't I turn to you to outline some of those impacts?
Sure, thanks, Wade. Like everybody else, we're just beginning to learn the impacts of these very significant cuts that have already taken place at the Forest Service, BLM, National Park Service, and other agencies that help keep our communities safe and our forests healthy. Across the board, we're hearing there have been more than a 10% cut in Forest Service staff, both in the region and nationally, including a 25% cut in folks that are non-firefighters. 10% may not sound like a lot, but the big concern on the wildfire side is not the actual firefighters, but it's the support services. It's the folks that do logistics, transportation, meals. Very serious concern on the part of CAL FIRE and other non-federal partners that we simply aren't going to have the capacity we need going in to this year's fire season. We're also concerned that each of the national forests are taking big cuts. That's going to have big impacts on the ground for each of the 18 national forests that exist in California, as well as the regional office that's set up to coordinate their work. The task force is all about partnering with the region on funding, on setting priorities, on coalition building. All of that is going to be at risk if we have to deal with 18 separate national forests. We're also concerned about some of the new targets for timber. Not that timber isn't important, but we can't keep our eye off of the need for fire and forest resilience in California. Serious concern by Forest Service people on the ground that if we solely focus on timber, we're going to lose our focus on protecting communities, protecting wildfire, protecting habitat, and other key measures of success. The Pacific Research Station hosts dozens of the nation's top forest scientists. The Forest Service is proposing as part of the national budget, not just to reduce them, but to completely eliminate all of the Forest Service's top scientists. That's going to have a huge effect on data systems, analysis, cutting edge science that we need now more than ever before to better plan, prioritize, and focus our efforts in California. And then finally, as you've heard from the governor, serious concern that Trump's effort to divert the National Guard in Southern California is drawing critical resources away from firefighting, just as the fire season is beginning to shape up. So Wade, those are just a few of some of the top line impacts that we're very concerned about.
Yeah, that's helpful. And it's just so helpful to get the facts out there. So, Patrick, I'm interested. You talked about we're now getting into the height of wildfire season. There's an active fire, the Madre fire, which is on I think partially on federal land, 80,000 acres. What's the gist of these cuts and these whether they've happened or the proposed actions on at the end of the day for a Californian that's worried about wildfire danger?
Sure. The key issue here is across those 18 national forests in rural areas, the Forest Service is often the backbone of the state's effort both to fight fires and to prevent fires. They know the terrain, they know the community, they know the road system. They've developed strong partnerships with cities, counties, RCDs, many of you. All that knowledge is going to be lost. That is so critical when we're both fighting fires and try to prevent fires. So the whole system is going to suffer. We're also concerned, as you heard from Governor Newsom last week in Colfax, that the level of treatment is going to be reduced. We heard there that CAL FIRE is doing a tremendous effort in building fuel break systems and designing treatments to protect local communities. But if the surrounding Forest Service land is not protected, not thinned, not undertaking prescribed fire, those communities throughout the state are going to continue to be at risk. That's the real fear we have.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that 57% of California's forest lands are managed by the federal government. And over several years, California state government has invested over $350 million of our state funding actually into projects on federal lands, in part because the federal government just hasn't made adequate investments. And Patrick, you talk about both response and prevention. One thing I've been concerned about on the response side is, those non-firefighter personnel are actually certified to provide incident management, leading wildfires. So these massive layoffs have impacted the number of incident management teams that can actually be put together to manage these fires that start on federal lands. And then you point out we've really set some aggressive goals for the amount of acreage we're going to get done on projects, fuel breaks, prescribed fire, vegetation thinning. And while I'm really proud that the state has made real progress towards our targets, that it seems like this funding and these layoffs is going to threaten the federal commitment. How concerned are you about the sort of a potential federal retreat in the
No,
amount of
we're
projects
really
we get done?
concerned about that. The feds now are about halfway towards their 500,000 acre target. So now is the time they need to be ramping up, not scaling back. So, and increasingly these projects are going larger in scale. They're no longer dozens of acres or hundreds of acres. They're thousands of acres. We need the Forest Service at the table to make sure those large scale treatments get done and that we meet our targets.
Yeah. And I'll state the obvious is we continue to partner in real time with the federal leaders at the Forest Service who remain on the job here in California. Remarkably talented people who have made their careers at the Forest Service. Patrick, what does it look like with the task force moving forward? Do you expect the Forest Service to still participate? How can those who are on the Zoom here today understand more what's happening at the task force and the progress we're going to continue to make despite all these cuts?
Sure. As you said, we continue to maintain a very, very strong partnership on the ground. And in fact, we're going to be partnering with the Forest Service this fall in developing a joint set of 5-year plans for every area of the state. So the good news is the planning is continuing, the emphasis is continuing. The way the state's going to deal with this is to continue to focus on local collaboratives who can do work on Forest Service land. So we're not going to keep our eye off the ball. We're going to continue to hit the highest priority areas. The concern is we need our federal partners there to do simple things like accepting a grant. I heard last week we were trying to get a couple $100,000 to the Forest Service for some critical data needs. They literally told us we do not have the staff to process the grant. So I hope that gives you an example of the nuts and bolts that are so essential to keep our forests and our communities safe that's at risk with these cuts.
Incredible. And it doesn't seem like there's ideological differences between Republicans and Democrats on this issue of wildfire resilience. Clearly, there are differences politically in DC on a lot of topics, but is it fair to say that there's bipartisan support for doing what we at the state think needs to get done?
Absolutely. The good news is we have a overwhelming consensus in Northern California on the need to thin our forests, get more prescribed fire done, and in Southern California, reduce ignitions. The key is, though, we need to scale up across the board if we're going to meet our targets and keep our communities safe. This news causes real concern in the federal ability to step up to meet our joint targets. Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Patrick. And if you're joining today and you have a question of Patrick or our administration on these wildfire impacts, put it into the Q&A button, and I'll ask Patrick in team to see if they can answer your question directly over the keyboard. I'm now going to shift to another critical priority, which is, of course, our water supply and water resilience, and bring on the screen my colleague, Carla Namath. If you work in California Water, you no doubt know Carla. She serves as the director of the state's Department of Water Resources and the governor's advisor on water infrastructure. And Carla, you are and have been right in the middle of all that we're driving forward on California Water. So I'd ask you to give us a summary of just what's transpired since January on this topic.
Sure. So, well, we started our January with a big wildfire in Southern California, and what has become kind of traditional to me, which is, here in California, we're very focused on water and how water moves. But the further you get all the way to the East Coast, the less understanding there is of sort of the mechanics of where water comes from and actually how reliant we are on one another, and Southern and Central and Bay Area reliant on water that comes from the northern part of the state, and these big systems that move water really everywhere. So, much like my colleague Patrick, where there's just such a close collaboration, with the federal government. In our sense, it's in a utility sense, and so we have the State Water Project, but then we also have the companion project, which is the Central Valley Project. And that's the Bureau of Reclamation that operates that project. It's designed to serve the water supply needs of about 2.3 million people. It's less urban, more ag, but those people include folks in the Silicon Valley and places like Fresno, real big communities in the state. But it also serves more than 3 million acres of irrigated agriculture in California. And in many places, that irrigated agriculture is also dealing very intensely with groundwater management. And so that interconnection between surface water and groundwater management, we're just really midstream on a very tough resource management issue, and reclamation supplies are a huge part of that. Reclamation itself has lost about 1,400 staff. That's just over 25% of its workforce already, and we're looking at some additional cuts in the neighborhood of 20% more. And so you can quickly get to the point that when you've got this lots of big infrastructure that needs to operate differently in connection with more extreme weather, or the system itself, a lot of it is aging infrastructure, and in and of itself poses a lot of risk if we don't keep pace with the rehabilitation and maintenance. And so, we're really still sorting out with our colleagues in the region how they're going to prioritize the work that they need to do. And because a lot of our infrastructure is operated in a cooperative way, it does have an expanded effect on how our whole system is put together. So we're really focusing pretty intensely on that. The reclamation's budget is also proposed to be cut about 33%. So staff cuts, budget cuts. Part of our challenge is also, these are big projects, and so when there are things like requirements that come from DOJ, which you need to get DOJ approval for anything over $50,000, you can imagine that becomes a real drag on our system for getting through the contracting process to get this important work done. Another place that we're tracking pretty closely is this category of water smart projects that are funded through the Bureau of Reclamation. These are things like desalination, recycled water, groundwater storage. We're really working hard to create a system that's very integrated because we know that every drop counts. And so there's about 140 million that's been proposed to be cut from that program. There's, lots of folks that rely on that. Really up and down the state, also in Southern California, which has a real Colorado River connection, of course, in terms of their water supply resilience. As the department that also manages flood protection for California, particularly in the Central Valley, but also in other parts of the state, we're monitoring very closely some cuts to flood protection projects. That includes projects here in Sacramento. It's one of the most flood-prone urban areas in the U.S., and we have been midstream on projects in the billions of dollars, enhancing our levee system here along the American River. So some of those projects are slated to be cut. Projects in 2023, we had a levee breach down near the Central Coast in a disadvantaged community. It's actually a core project that had been on the books since 1948 or 49, which is it's intense when you think about it, how long it takes to get those projects up and going. And unfortunately, that Pajaro River project is also really in the crosshairs for budget cuts. I think another real piece of what we're starting to track, also on the dam safety and levee safety side, the federal government had been a source of very cost-effective, low-interest loans to get that kind of rehabilitation work done, and that has been significantly cut back. And then finally, in terms of our operations, we really do rely on partners, not just at the Bureau of Reclamation, but at the Natural Resource Conservation Service over at USDA, and then the Forest Service at USDA. They help us with a lot of our snow monitoring, which is so important for us to understand, especially in a changing climate. I think we know it's not just more of our precipitation coming as rain and less as snow, but what happens with our ambient temperatures, and how quickly does that snow melt? And there have been several cuts to those programs as well. So we're really taking a step back and looking at the system as a whole. We have a lot of our water districts that are also invested in that kind of forecasting, and looking at the whole menu and really starting to understand what potential vulnerabilities there are as we head into our next water year.
So it seems like there are really two categories of actions as I see it. One are these cuts, this sort of federal retreat from investing in infrastructure that California communities and agriculture need. And that, as Sarah said, are probably open questions with the Congress. But then there's just this other sort of dismantling of the expertise, both at the Bureau of Reclamation and, with some really key experts on everything from flood safety to your point on snowpack and runoff. How alarmed are you about the federal agency's ability to continue to actually just operate the infrastructure? We saw that, situation with the Army Corps releases in the Tulare Basin earlier in the year, which was a little bit chaotic. I mean, just give us your honest assessment.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that, because these water projects are big, they're very unique. It is a specific kind of expertise. So we are here in the region with our colleagues at Reclamation. We're looking at the reduction in staff. They're really, they're also responding to, as Sarah mentioned at the top of the hour, this very confusing kind of, are they cut? Are they not cut? Then there's a stay, and what does that mean? And I think the other thing that's maybe a little bit more subtle is the morale that, starts to drop when you're not valued as an employee, or there's too much uncertainty. People have, families to do, mortgages to pay, things to do. And so we have seen, even people who haven't been cut, real expertise leaving these agencies that really present a challenge for us. So one, Secretary, we're focused on understanding what Reclamation's our priorities are going to be with the budget cuts and the people that they have available. So we're in a bit of a wait and see mode, I would say. As a general matter, our governor has, through an executive order, asked the state departments to find flexibility in our systems, making sure that we are operating optimally when we get lots of weather through our system. And so some of those conversations, I think I would have expected them to have a little more legs by this time, but it's a little slower going, and we really do have decisions to make as we move into next year, and how we're going to fulfill that need to make sure that we are protecting species, but to make sure that we are also focused on the fact that the hydrology is changing, and there are opportunities to be as flexible as we can when the hydrology presents itself. It's going to be that helps California weather the next drought. But we also have to have infrastructure investment, right? To make sure we have infrastructure that can move water better. I think obviously the governor has several big priorities. There's a real degree of interface with the federal government on things like sites. Reservoir, for example, we have our Delta Conveyance Project, but we also have something called Healthy Rivers and Landscapes that is a very important partnership partnership with a lot of the Central Valley Project contractors and reclamation. And so, our ability to move through those programs is front and center, especially since we've collectively, with our water users from all over the state, have invested a lot of time and energy, I think, on things that are a real paradigm shift that really position California to do better into the future. So lots of challenges coming at us.
Yeah, and one point you've always educated me on is just how intertwined the federal infrastructure is with the state infrastructure, and the federal management is with the state management. And so I know, under your leadership and so many in state government, we're going to continue to, protect people from flood and make sure that water supplies are flowing, regardless of what happens at the federal government. But I think our message is clear: is we need our federal agencies to have capacity to be full partners in this effort in California.
Yeah, I do want to touch a little bit on the National Weather Service and, what we've all seen tragically unfold in Texas just really almost a week ago today. And so one thing, I think to note, California's geology and topography is different from Texas. So we tend to not have the same kind of flashy events. We can have big downpours in short periods of time, but we don't necessarily have the soil profiles, that hard pan that create these conditions. And I do think, in all likelihood, the state of California probably has a different bent on land use and the way that we sort of protect people, because land use and flooding are so intertwined. And we really do have a very robust system for communicating between, the state and the counties. And we'll all see, how well that took place. But one thing that we're really tracking is our forecasting abilities. So if you remember, in 2023, we had all those atmospheric rivers. The federal government was sending C-130s out over the Pacific Ocean. They were dropping these sensors into these big atmospheric rivers. That really helps us. That helps us manage for public safety, but also for water supply, because it enables us to understand how strong it's going to be and where it's going to make landfall. And so that's not a task that is easily replicated at the state level, but there are other things that we can do to make sure that when those storm events do come, we're as ready as possible. And so really in about February or March, we started focusing in on data sets and modeling. Usually when we get into storm events and we're in response mode, folks become familiar with the California Nevada River Forecasting Center, and that's a website where these river systems really light up around river stage and flood potential. So we've been already, for over the past few months, making sure that we maintain access to that data and those models. And right now we're doing a deep dive on some of the personnel cuts, because you need people, expertise. Secretary, as you mentioned, real specific experts can operate those models. So what we're looking at is, where do we think we're going to lose that expertise in the Weather Service and at NOAA, and then overlay that with our own vulnerabilities in the state, and make sure that those places where we have people and we have steep slopes and low-lying lands, that all of our work is really focused on understanding that risk and being ready for it.
Wow. Well, huge thanks for all of the advanced planning you're doing to identify where is the federal government dropping off these critical functions, and where are we gonna, where do we need to step in. Really appreciate it. If you have a question for Director Namath, Carla, please put it in your Q&A, and she's going to be monitoring that. Let's move to public recreation and conservation. And outdoor recreation specifically. I want to bring on Armando Quintero onto the screen, and Dana Stroud. Armando leads our state parks department in the state, the nation's largest state park system, and Dana helps to lead the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, with the focus on regional economic development. You two have both been tracking the impacts of federal actions on outdoor recreation, which is part of what we love about being in California. Let me turn it to you both to tell us what's been happening on this front.
Thank you, Wade, and hi, Dana. Well, State Parks has always maintained a very close working relationship with all of our federal land partners in California. And there are some areas that we actually co-manage with federal agencies or federal parklands up in the North Coast and also in Southern California. Currently with state parks, what they are experiencing, or national parks, is they are experiencing a 24% loss of permanent staff since January. And also only a very small portion of the summer seasonal staff that were promised to be hired have been hired so far. One of the real big impacts is we've heard my other colleagues talk about leaderships and the real knowledge keepers that are managing these agencies. Right now at national parks, there are currently over 100 vacant superintendent positions. These are the managers for big national park areas across the nation. There is a secretarial order which exempts public safety positions from the hiring fees that has been imposed on national parks, but there is no authorization to hire staff to deliver programs, information, resources management, and other support services in our national parks. And one of the things that I am seeing, because I do keep in close contact with our federal land managers across the state, is they are reporting, a number of employees are experiencing anxiety and even panic attacks because of the uncertainty that has already been expressed again by my other colleagues. And I just want to say that, the folks that work in these public lands, which are yours, which you visit, are your fellow citizens that not only protect these public lands, but they protect your safety when you visit these places. And right now, those folks are operating in a shifting landscape of both career and stability trauma. One of the things that's happened with national parks is there are reduced hours. Many tours have been canceled. Visitors are closed, as are some campgrounds. And what we're seeing is that our senior park managers, the folks that should be doing the big management decisions in parks, are having to go out and do frontline duties, running entrance stations and providing basic support out in the field. There is a proposed $1 billion cut to the national parks annual budget that represents a fifth of their overall budget. And as I mentioned, the things earlier that are being impacted, this could really impact safety, emergency response times, and certainly endanger visitors. One of the things that's also worth noting is that Secretarial Order 3426 ensures that national parks are open and accessible, which intends to ensure that all trails, visitor centers, and campgrounds, but it's not sure how we're going to be able to do that and how our federal partners are going to be able to do that. Because again, we do partner with them. There are also, in terms of the budget cuts, one of the things that's been happening or proposed is that the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which are funds that are distributed across the nation for state agencies to deliver support for water and land conservation across their states, that money is proposed to be deferred, moved for deferred maintenance projects in national parks. And what we're seeing in state parks is what they're seeing in national parks, and that is that tourism has not slowed down. We are seeing record numbers of visitors, and actually, as times become stressful, we see even more people coming to these public lands, as we all experienced during COVID. The changes within federal lands are really uncertain. The loss of employment, reduced visitation, and tourism and recreation revenue for rural communities could have a big impact. And I know Dana will talk about that. One of the things that
Can we actually bring Dana into this? Thank you.
Sure.
I just want to make sure.
Going to stop. Go ahead.
On the bullets, we had the national forests because they're actually provide a ton more campgrounds and, on a numeric basis than national parks, as well as Bureau of Land Management. Dana, you work with a lot of these rural communities. What are you hearing in terms of on the ground impacts across rural California?
Yeah, so it is directly affecting many of our local gateway communities that are the pathway for visitors to access these federal lands that we have, we cherish here in California. What we're starting to see very specifically are the responsibilities that are falling on our local communities to cover the loss of staff and the loss of services that were previously being provided by our federal partners. So we're going to start to see and have already been experiencing a change in how trash is picked up and managed, and the maintenance of the restrooms that our visitors use. We're also starting to see where federal staff is not available to process projects where we want to have trail improvements or where we want to have a change in their access. So much of this work that we used to rely on our federal partners to literally partner with us to deliver on is now starting to fall on our local communities. And so in encouraging our local communities to think about the mechanisms that they can put into place to help potentially address these shortfalls and minimize potential impacts. I know we've got many local communities on this call today that are stepping into that void and producing things such as informational videos to help people understand how to be fire safe, how to be camp wise. We've got NGOs on the call that have executed agreements to do work on the federal landscape around trails maintenance, trail development. And so we're seeing the locals step into it. But in all seriousness, you used the term earlier, the dismantling of our federal partners is going to have this key impact because so much of that work, we are dependent upon our federal partners to help us deliver and help us provide a safe, quality visitor experience. I'll just add that in the state's recent economic blueprint, we had 9 of our 13 regions identify tourism and outdoor recreation as a key sector for driving their local economies. And when we start to see some of these impacts change how people visit or change how our people are able to access, we're now starting to impact these economies. So there's that economic impact as well as the natural resource impact and even the diminished visitor experience that we might be seeing.
It's amazing and discouraging and alarming. I want to share that also on that slide were proposed attacks on protections on federal land. As I shared, almost half of California is owned and managed by the federal government. Some of our most sensitive areas to tribes culturally, but also environmentally sensitive areas, watersheds, think headwaters, are protected under the so-called roadless rule in the national forest or by national monuments, which 18 Republican and Democratic presidents have used to protect lands. That's all in question right now. Armando and Dana, we are only scratching the surface of this topic, and I know you're in touch with a lot of folks on this. If you have a question for either of these folks, please put it in Q&A. I do want to share something Armando would say, which is state parks is very much open for business this summer. We're continuing to experience high visitation, maybe higher if our federal partners really falter in providing a safe opportunity for people to get outside. So really serious impacts. I want to shift to coast and oceans and bring on my colleague, Jen Eckerly. Jen serves as the executive director of the Ocean Protection Council and also works with me at our Natural Resources Agency as the leader on coasts and oceans. And Jen, we don't have a lot of time here today, but just give us the top lines about how our beloved coast and the ocean is being impacted by these changes in DC.
Thank you, Secretary. So since January of this year, the actions from the Trump administration have significantly reduced the federal workforce and funding and science programs. And this is impacting coastal and ocean research and monitoring management programs across California. It includes funding and staffing cuts that are threatening our nation's key ocean agency, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. And NOAA provides vital information and services, including weather forecasting, climate monitoring, and management of fisheries and our other coastal and ocean resources across the country. We've already seen a 10% cut in NOAA staff. And this is resulting not only in a significant loss of leadership and expertise, and as we've heard from other speakers, but it's also eliminating early career professionals that are really our next generation of environmental stewards. The administration has now proposed a $2 billion cut to NOAA's budget, eliminating essential programs and further reducing staffing levels. And these cuts remove critical expertise and capacity at the federal level, which really impacts our ability to effectively manage California's coastal and ocean resources. The proposed budget includes eliminating funding for the Coastal Zone Management Program. This is the program that supports states in managing our coastal resources across the nation, public access, recreation, building resilience for coastal communities. These cuts would eliminate funding for California's 3 coastal zone management programs that are administered by the California Coastal Commission, the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission, and the State Coastal Conservancy. This will reduce agency budgets and our staff capacity to effectively manage and protect our coast and ocean. The budget also eliminates other really important programs, including funding for the National Estuarine Research Reserves. This is a nationwide network of coastal sites that are focused on place-based conservation and stewardship and education. Cuts to this program would hit California's 3 research reserves in Elkhorn Slough, San Francisco Bay, and the Tijuana River, impacting efforts to protect vulnerable places, connect communities to nature, and translate science into action. The budget is also proposing to eliminate the 50-year-old National Sea Grant program that includes California's 2 sea grant programs. These programs provide science that support fisheries and coastal resilience and ecosystem health. They also contribute to vital workforce development and training the next generation of skilled professionals. This is going to have impacts to key scientific and community partners that are helping advance the state's priorities. The budget is also proposing to eliminate the integrated ocean observing system. This provides really critical information on ocean conditions, coastal hazards, and water quality across the nation. It will impact California's 2 regional observing programs, causing the loss of information for safe navigation, emergency response, public health, and the protection of marine life and habitats. I also want to highlight that the federal government is also moving forward with plans to expand offshore oil and gas development across coastal United States, including 3 lease areas that extend along the entire coast of California in federal waters. This expansion poses significant and unacceptable risk to California's coastal economy, impacts to tourism, recreation, and fishing and public access, and it threatens marine life and habitats in one of the most diverse coastal ecosystems in the world. We're also seeing recent federal actions that will have serious consequences for California's ability to prepare and adapt to climate change. We've seen significant cuts to key infrastructure for monitoring atmospheric rivers, major storm paths and intensity through reductions in supporting flights, satellites, radar, and ocean monitoring buoys. Earlier this month, the administration dismissed hundreds of scientists who are leading the next national climate assessment. This is the country's comprehensive evaluation of how climate change is going to affect human health and water supply and fisheries and so much more. They dismantled the U.S. Global Climate Change Research Program, pulled down the federal website that has key reports and research, and have proposed eliminating the entire office of the Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, which coordinates and performs all of NOAA's climate and research, weather research. Obviously, these actions are going to hamper California's ability to predict, respond, and adapt to climate impacts like sea level rise, ocean acidification, marine heat waves, and will lead to impacts for our coastal economies and ecosystems. Just as one example, the Ocean Protection Council relies on the sea level rise scenarios from the National Climate Assessment to develop specific predictions of sea level rise in California to help California communities understand their risk and take action to adopt. We're also seeing cuts to the Coastal Data Information Program, or CDIP, at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. These are buoys that provide really important data that support flood forecasting, beach erosion modeling, and storm preparedness. And finally, I will just close by highlighting the Trump administration has terminated FEMA's Building Resilience, Infrastructure, and Communities Program, or the BRIC program, which is providing grants to reduce risk to natural hazards and enhance nature-based solutions and climate resilience. As a result, California will lose $870 million in funding, including projects along the coast. An example of this is a project that had state cost share from the Ocean Protection Council, an $18 million BRIC grant to the city of Imperial Beach. for a project that would build resilience for the community, protect infrastructure, access, and habitat from sea level rise. So California, we're just going to keep moving forward and supporting all of the research and monitoring and planning and restoration that needs to get done. But the loss of federal funds and the elimination of these critical programs will really disrupt our ability to maximize our benefits. Oh, Secretary, you are on mute.
Sorry. And, to protect people. I remember being down with the governor in the Santa Cruz Capitola area when that huge storm surge had destroyed the pier, really impacted the coastal community. And there was that great report in one of the periodicals about, as you pointed out, Scripps losing those offshore funding for those offshore buoys that predict storm surge and really give important warnings to coastal communities. It's a little bit remarkable. I'll share too that, Geeta has put in the chat so many articles that are revealing the scale with really specific impacts or examples of these impacts. And I just want to, give credit to journalists for revealing just how these actions are impacting us in California and beyond. It's not clear and transparent from Washington, D.C. what's happening right now. So journalism is playing a really important role in revealing just what's at stake. Jen, huge thanks. And if you have a question on ocean and coast, please put it in the Q&A. Lastly, I want to introduce Robert Chun, who is a colleague who serves as the Chief of Staff to the California Energy Commission Chair, David Hochschild. The CEC, the California Energy Commission, is one of our state agencies that coordinates with others to really advance the state's energy goals. To reach 100% clean energy in the next 20 years and do it in a reliable, safe, and affordable way. And of course, transition transportation to reduce pollution that impacts our communities and contributes to climate change. Robert, huge thanks being here. Give us a sense of what's happening in the energy sector.
Thank you, Secretary. It's great to be here. As the Secretary indicated, we're working to get California to a 100% clean energy future. So let me walk through some of the big changes we're seeing. I think the first thing we're seeing is the administration ending our longstanding tax credits for clean energy. So for decades, the Congress has invested in clean energy with two major tax credits for clean energy. That's the ITC and the PTC, the investment tax credit and the production tax credit. But under the legislation passed by Congress this month, those credits are going to sunset and sunset pretty quickly. So they're only going to apply to projects that are placed into service by December 2027 and those that start construction by July 2026. And the data we're seeing suggests that this bill is going to make energy more expensive for Americans. So there's a great modeling group at Princeton called Repeat that's actually run the numbers here, and they expect the typical American household to pay around $200 to $300 more for energy each year thanks to this bill. And they expect that we're going to add a lot less new capacity to the grid, which could have impacts on reliability and the growth of new industries like AI. So we're doing everything we can to help projects get across the finish line in time to access those tax credits. I'd say the second thing we're seeing is the administration eliminating or freezing programs that Congress had previously authorized to support clean energy. So to be honest, there are almost too many examples to count, but I'll give you one. So a few years ago, Congress created the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations at the Department of Energy to actually help bridge that divide between R&D and commercial deployment. Based on public reporting, we now believe that the administration has reduced that office's staff from 250 people down to just 35. That's about 90% reduction in force in that office alone. The administration has also announced that it's canceling 24 of the awards that office managed, totaling about $3.7 billion. At least $800 million of those grants were supposed to go to California, including for projects in low-income communities with high levels of pollution. So that's just one example. The Department of Energy started the year with about 16,000 employees. Based on public reporting, we believe that nearly 4,000 or 25% have accepted early resignation offers. We've seen similar reductions in headcount at other agencies like the Department of Interior and EPA. We're grappling with similar uncertainty for other key programs like NEVI, Energy Star. It's a little too early to say exactly what the administration intends to do with each one of these programs, but we're monitoring each one very closely so that we can mitigate the impacts for Californians. I'd say the third thing that we're seeing is the administration removing some basic energy efficiency regulations that exist to protect consumers. So DOE has been setting appliance standards for about 50 years. The typical American household saves more than $500 because of these efficiency standards. But in recent months, DOE has announced that they intend to roll back 18 of those rules. That's not only unlawful, it's also deeply costly for consumers. That rollback is estimated to cost consumers about $43 billion in the years to come, and it'll create instability for manufacturers and also unnecessarily increase demand at a time when we're trying to scale up AI, EVs, heat pumps, and more. And the fourth thing, just to close it out, that we're seeing is the administration making it harder to protect clean air through zero emission transportation. So since the Clean Air Act was adopted in 1970, the EPA has granted California hundreds of waivers. Those waivers are what allow us to actually set the innovative standards to address some of our pretty unique air quality challenges here in California. They allow us to run our Clean Cars and Trucks programs, which promote zero emission vehicles to improve air quality. But earlier this year, the Congress illegally used the Congressional Review Act to revoke those waivers. Governor Newsom and Attorney General Rob Bonta have filed lawsuits to defend ourselves from those actions. But if the administration succeeds, it will make it harder to actually improve the air, especially in places like the San Joaquin Valley in LA. It'll also just cost Californians who need to pay more for gasoline and oil changes and things like that. So we're fighting back with everything we've got. I'd say that's a quick tour of the challenges we're facing, but I think it's important to also underscore that California can and will make tremendous progress on clean energy, even during this administration. Maybe that's something we can talk about.
Yeah, please. It's alarming and discouraging the way that clean energy is being attacked, and it's impacting real great projects that create jobs in California. Give us a sense of optimism around our progress moving forward.
Sure thing. So I say this. During the first Trump administration, a lot of folks worried we'd lose momentum on clean energy. But they were actually wrong. If anything, the clean energy transition accelerated during those years. A lot of folks don't realize that we actually retired more coal under Trump's first term than under Obama's second term. When Trump entered office, coal powered more than 30% of the grid. When he left in 2020, it powered less than 20%. Why? For the same reason we moved away from whale oil, right? We invented better, cheaper, cleaner stuff. And today, solar and wind are the cheapest and most abundant energy around. And they're the reason why more than 95% of additions to the US grid each year are clean. So I think that's the big lesson of the first Trump administration. They can slow the transition to clean energy here and there, but they can't stop it, right? So we shouldn't back down from our vision of a clean energy future or lower our expectations for what we can achieve here in California.
That's amazing, Robert. And that's such a well put in a cogent way. And that's a great end to our dive into 5 specific areas. I want to bring everybody back on screen if we could, just to thank you and just make a couple of important points. One is California remains committed and focused to our priorities and our values. We speak for Governor Newsom, but I also would go so far as to speak for the legislature, where it has passed state laws in this respect. We've got a strong set of state leaders that are maintaining our progress in each of these areas. And all of us who joined today, again, over 1,000 people joined us today. None of us are powerless in this situation. As our colleagues would share here on screen, there's something that each of us can do. So I want to bring up our last slide in the last couple of minutes on what actually you can do. And we broke it down in 4 specific ways. One is stay informed. Obviously, stay connected to allies working on these topics across your communities and across California. We've got an information source that we put out on a regular basis, and that includes following us on social media and what we call the buzz, but certainly other state agencies as well. Make your voice heard. Sarah explained that a lot of the cuts that we talked today about are proposed cuts that are being discussed by Congress. They are for infrastructure, for services, for data, for information that protect all communities. And I would argue there's strong bipartisan support for maintaining this stuff, but they have to hear from us. Third is share your story. We have to communicate the real impacts of these changes on our lives and in our communities. And like I said, media has been doing a good job of that, but we have to continue to share our stories. And the last is build bridges. Another optimistic point in this whole challenge of 2025 was when conservation leaders across the political spectrum came together, as Sarah mentioned, to defeat a proposal by a Utah senator to sell public lands. 10 million acres of California's public lands protected for generations would have been eligible for sale had this passed in budget reconciliation. And it was the broad-based coalition, including environmental groups and hunters and anglers and local governments and tribes and so many others that came together to push back. We understand the political reality in Washington, D.C. right now, but we also recognize that what we're talking about today are things that we all care about, regardless of our party identification or our ideology. So make connection on these issues with people that might speak differently and might have influence with different leaders in Washington, D.C. I'm so thankful of the work that everybody is doing, both on this call and across state government. For those displaced federal employees, we've got great opportunities to join state government. We've got a career center that you can reach out to just to understand what opportunities exist. We are stronger together, and knowledge is power. So I hope this last hour has been beneficial to just sharing all that's happening in a factual way, and hopefully giving some sense of optimism that you've got leaders here in California that are staying focused on moving forward. Let's move to our last slide. If you have any input or questions or suggestions based on today's discussion, please send an email to us at this email on your screen, and we'll respond to you. And once again, huge thanks to panelists for sharing all of this important